What's so spooky about Bonfire Night? Why do we celebrate it? And what does it have to do with Guy Fawkes? If you were confused by your school teacher as cryptic comments on this topic, or you rate just British and never quite understood why we set fire to effigies and let off fireworks every November, then this is the video for you. Welcome to my channel. It's time to get spooky. And today we're talking about the Gunpowder Plot and the night of November 5th, 1605. You may be surprised to hear that during Queen Elizabeth I's reign, England was not exactly the most peaceful place. Not only did her advisors frequently try and push her towards marriage in order to secure a Protestant heir, but there were constant rebellions, plots, and assassination attempts against her. While many of these were religiously motivated, they also had political aims, like getting rid of the monarchy altogether. In order to understand this plot, though, you need to know that there was no love lost between England and its newfound rival, Spain. Their rivalry had started during the reign of Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII, when he broke with the Roman Catholic Church after the Pope refused to grant him a divorce from Catherine of Aragon. When Elizabeth came to power in 1558, tensions were still high, especially as she established a Protestant state. Spain, on the other hand, was staunchly Catholic, and it saw England as break with the Church as an attack on all of Christendom. By the end of the century, things had escalated so much that Spain even invaded England, though that's a story for another day. So let's stick with 1605. By this point, Elizabeth was more than 60 years old and her health was failing. She had numerous bouts of ill health throughout her life, and there were very few people who thought that she would live past 1604. At the start of the year, doctors even advised her to make a will, which understandably sent her into a bit of a tizzy. But it wasn't just the Queen's mortality that was weighing heavily on people's minds. There was also the small matter of succession. As mentioned before, she'd never married, and although she had a number of relatives, none of them were in line ahead of her. Instead, the throne would pass to her cousin, King James VI of Scotland, should she die. This meant that England would be united under one monarch, but that Scotland would become a Protestant nation, something that many English Catholics were dead against. While the Scottish succession was generally accepted, there were many people who felt that the throne should go to a Catholic. The most likely candidate was the young Lady Arabella Stuart, daughter of Henry VIII's sister, Mary Tudor. However, while she was next in line, she was also half Scottish and half French, which made her less popular in England than her cousin, James. What's more, the possibility of a Stuart monarch was becoming more and more likely because Elizabeth was still yet to produce an heir. Her ladies-in-waiting had been instructed to move into her rooms at court in order to be close at hand should the Queen finally conceive. For a woman in her position, the pressure to produce an heir would have been immense. However, even if Elizabeth did get pregnant, there was no guarantee that the child would survive. Infant mortality was rampant and most children lost their lives before reaching the age of 5. If a son did survive, however, then he would take precedence over any daughters born within the royal family. This was the case with Arabella Stuart's brother, Henry. Born in 1594, he was already seen as the true heir to the throne. It was this injustice that led 5 men to devise a plan to blow up the House of Lords and eradicate the entire royal line of succession. These men are now known as the Gunpowder Plotters. The ringleaders were Robert Catesby and Thomas Wintour, both English Catholics, along with the previously mentioned Thomas Percy, whose family had fallen out with the crown. The 4th member was John Wright, who brought with him military experience from his time fighting in the Netherlands. Together, they began planning how they would deal with the threat of a Stuart king. They knew that to be successful, they would need gunpowder and lots of it. Enter Guy Fawkes, a former soldier who'd seen better days. Fawkes had fallen on hard times. His wife had died, and he was desperately trying to pay off his debts. In October 1605, Catesby met Fawkes and offered him a job, one that would pay him back every shilling he ever borrowed from his friends, and then some. All he needed to do was allow the conspirators to store their barrels of gunpowder in the cellar of a building near Parliament. Fawkes agreed, and everything seemed to be going well until an anonymous letter arrived, warning one of the plotter's associates, Lord Monteagle, that the plot had been discovered. When he read the letter, Monteagle panicked and immediately informed the authorities. That night, the conspirators snuck into the cellar to find that someone had already tipped off the guards. Every single barrel of gunpowder had been removed and the plot had been foiled. Although only Fawkes was caught red-handed, all 5 members of the conspiracy lost their heads. As for Fawkes, he became the celebrity prisoner of the crown, appearing everywhere from broadsheets to poems to plays. Some stories even claim that he was offered a noble title and granted his freedom. Should he turn informant? However, despite being interrogated over 20 times, he remained loyal to his friends and refused to reveal any details of the plot. He was eventually executed on January 31, 1606. His head was cut off and hung from the gallows at Westminster Bridge, a warning to any would-be traitors. The rest of his body was buried in a nearby church, where it remained until 1840. When the church was restored, his remains were moved to the crypt of the House of Lords, where they remain today. November 5th was chosen to commemorate the foiling of the Gunpowder Plot, and to this day, we celebrate it with bonfires and fireworks, as well as by burning an effigy of Guy Fawkes. Although Fawkes was one of the main players in the conspiracy, it's important to remember that there were 4 other men involved. Each had different reasons for wanting to join the plot, but each gave their allegiance to Robert Catesby, the ringleader. So who was he? Robert Catesby was born in 1573 to a wealthy Catholic family. Like many of his co-conspirators, he felt passionately about his religion. As a young man, he attended St. John's College, Cambridge, but his studies were interrupted when his father was charged with treason. In order to protect his inheritance, Robert was forced to flee to France. During his time there, he met Thomas Wintour and Thomas Percy, who shared his religious beliefs. The 3 men swore an oath to bring Catholicism to England, even if it meant sacrificing their lives. They called themselves the Fellowship of the Holy Trinity. While in exile, Catesby witnessed the Spanish Armada's failed attempt to invade England. Far from being deterred, however, this only strengthened his resolve. Once the Armada had been defeated, Catesby returned home and continued his plans to overthrow the government and replace it with a Catholic dynasty. It's believed that he had the support of several other nobles, including the Earl of Northumberland, whose daughter, Lady Custis, was Catesby's fiancée. Had the plot succeeded, she would have become the Marchioness of Montgomery, and her son, Henry, would have inherited the throne. Unfortunately for them, Catesby's plan was betrayed and both he and his fiancée lost their heads. But who was the mysterious informant who saved the king? The identity of the person who exposed the Gunpowder Plot has never been confirmed, though there are a few interesting theories. The leading hypothesis suggests that the letter exposing the plot was written by Franciscus, a servant of Lord Monteagle. According to one version of events, he stumbled upon the plot by accident, was horrified by what he learned. Choosing loyalty to the crown over his master, he wrote to the Earl of Northumberland, warning him not to go anywhere near Parliament on November. The face of the infamous Guy Fawkes, aka the man responsible for the gunpowder treason, has become synonymous with fireworks in England. The reason? Well, his failed attempt to blow up Parliament in 1605 is something that the British have not let him live down. But what happened to his face after he was captured? What did they do to it? And why does it appear like this in all those famous pictures? Well, today we're gonna find out. But before we dive into the details, there's one thing I need to make very clear about this video. This isn't a history lesson. This is a legend explained. So while some of what we talk about may be rooted in truth, the way it's been told and retold over the years has become something of a myth. With that being said, though, there are still some fascinating facts within this story that are definitely worth knowing. And as always, if you want to know more about the historical events that inspire this video, check the info below. Now let's get started. It was November 5th, 1605, when Thomas Parker, a member of the House of Lords, received an anonymous letter warning him not to go to Parliament that day, because there was a plot to kill him and everyone else inside. At first, he thought it was just another one of those crank letters that people sometimes sent to powerful people. But then he changed his mind. Why? Because the letter warned him to meet at a specific place outside of town at midnight on November, and there was no way someone could have known that he had made plans to meet his friend Lord Monteagle there. So it seemed like he had no choice but to go. When he got there, however, he found no one except a lone sentry guarding the gate. After speaking with the man, it became clear that the meeting was canceled, but not before it was reported to the authorities. By the time Guy Fawkes arrived at the rendezvous point, soldiers were waiting for him, and when they searched his horse, they found 36 barrels of gunpowder along with several long-burning slow matches. In other words, the key components of a massive bomb. Not only that, but Guy was carrying a dark powder on his clothes, which was later found to contain traces of sulfur and charcoal, the items commonly used in explosives at the time. All of this evidence led to the immediate arrest of Guy Fawkes and the start of one of the most brutal tortures in history. On November, He was taken before a panel of judges, including the infamous Judge Jeffries, who would soon preside over the Salem witch trials in Massachusetts. When asked why he tried to assassinate so many important members of the government, Guy replied that he had nothing against King James I, but that he wanted to bring about a complete reform of the government. He also claimed that hundreds of people had helped him, but that he was willing to die rather than reveal their names. For his trouble, the judges decided to hang him, draw and quarter him, meaning they would rip his body into 4 pieces after hanging him. It wasn't exactly the punishment he was hoping to avoid. So now you might be wondering what happened to his face during all of this. Well, the answer is nothing. The plan was always to cut off his head. That was the purpose of the hanging. And the reason his face looks the way it does in famous pictures is simple. It's not Guy Fawkes at all. The actual Guy Fawkes died in 1606 after being tortured for trying to overthrow the king. The guy whose face is shown in those pictures is actually a stock character in the story, meant to represent anyone who tries to cause trouble for the government. Think of him as Guy Fawkes, a wordplay on Guy Fawkes, or simply a stock character used to scare children every November. Okay, so we got the legend part out of the way. Now let's talk about what really happened to Guy Fawkes' face. Unfortunately, there's not much to say. We don't even know what he looked like because there are no surviving portraits of him. The image usually associated with Guy Fawkes is actually a drawing of Robert Catesby, one of the co-conspirators in the Gunpowder Plot. However, we do know what happened to his face because contemporary sources described it in great detail. Here's what happened according to those who saw it. After his execution on October 31st, 1606, Guy Fawkes' head was cut off and hung from the gallows at the corner of Whitehall, near where he had been executed. The reason? Well, it was considered an example to other would-be traitors. The gruesome display of Fawkes' head didn't end there, though. After remaining on the gallows for 5 days, it was taken down and hung from the nearby Temple Bar. This was done to show that London was still in control after the scare of the Gunpowder Plot. Finally, after hanging from the bar for several months, Guy's head was taken down, placed in a red leather bag, and sent to various places around the country as a warning to other potential traitors. In fact, there's evidence that Guy Fawkes' head may have ended up in several places at once, as there are several bills for the transportation of a traitor's head from London to other parts of the country. Historians believe that after it was cut off, Fawkes' head may have been displayed in a number of cities, including York, Bristol, and Cambridge, and possibly even sent to Ireland. However, despite these reports, no one knows exactly where Guy Fawkes' head ended up. Now, you might be wondering why his body wasn't buried. Well, that's because of the whole drawing and quartering thing. As we mentioned earlier, Guy Fawkes' body was ripped into 4 pieces after they cut off his head. These pieces were then put on display in different parts of London, including at the 4 corners of Newgate, a prison built beside London's old city wall. The purpose of this was twofold. First, it was to punish Fawkes' body like they had his head. But second, it was also a way of ensuring that his remains would not rest in peace. After all, if he were buried, people might come to see his grave, and that could turn into a full-blown shrine. By displaying his dismembered body around the city, the government was able to prevent that from happening. However, unlike his head, there's some evidence that the rest of Guy Fawkes' body eventually ended up in one place. According to a number of historians, his heart was buried under the floor of St. Bride's Church in Fleet Street. There is also a report that his entrails were sent to his family and buried in the Fawkes Vault at Chich, Essex. Whether or not that's true is up for debate, but it would certainly make sense. His family wouldn't want his organs displayed around the city, so it makes sense that they would ask for them back. Likewise, it would also make sense that they would want to bury them with his heart. So that's what happened to Guy Fawkes' face, his head and his body. But what about his legacy? Well, it's complicated. On the one hand, he's become a symbol of rebellion against authority. The burning of effigies of Guy Fawkes and the celebration of Bonfire Night is seen by some as a way of showing opposition to those in power. On the other hand, he's also become a symbol of English patriotism. After all, he tried to kill a bunch of English nobles and the king himself. Too many people. Guy Fawkes is simply a villain who tried to destroy everything they hold dear. So what's the truth? Well, probably somewhere in between. Guy Fawkes was a complex figure who acted for a number of different reasons. While he certainly wanted to bring about a change in government, he also hated the king for personal reasons. And it's impossible to ignore the fact that he tried to kill a bunch of innocent people. In the end, Guy Fawkes is best remembered as a symbol of those who oppose authority but also as a warning to those who would seek to destroy everything we hold dear. And now you know what happened to his face after he was caught. The morning of January 31st, 1606, was bitter and gray as crowds gathered along the old palace yard at Westminster. The city buzzed with anticipation not for a festival, but for a spectacle of state-sanctioned horror. It was execution day, and at the center of it all was Guy Fawkes, the face of England's most infamous act of treason. But he was no longer the man who had boldly stood over 36 barrels of gunpowder. After weeks of torture in the Tower of London, he was skeletal, broken, unable to walk. His limbs had been stretched by the rack, his joints dislocated, and his spirit shattered. Guards had to carry him out. His face was gaunt, his hands barely worked, and his body was draped in cloth like a rag doll. But the punishment waiting for him was even more merciless than the torture that preceded it. English law demanded that traitors be hanged, drawn, and quartered, a ritualized death designed to degrade, destroy, and warn, and it would be performed in public, not just as punishment, but as political theater. Fawkes was one of 4 men scheduled for execution that day. He would be the last, forced to watch his fellow conspirators suffer first. One by one, the others were dragged to the scaffold, tied to a wooden frame, and partially hang-strangled just long enough to approach death, but kept alive for the rest of the ordeal. Then came the drawing. While still breathing, they were laid out, and a blade sliced open their abdomens. Their intestines and genitals were pulled out in front of the crowd, sometimes still pulsing, and thrown into a fire. The pain was indescribable. Their bodies convulsed, faces contorted in agony. Some screamed, some went silent from the sheer trauma. The crowd, bloodthirsty and cheering, watched every second. Each piece of their body would be displayed in different parts of the kingdom. This was not just an execution, it was a message written in blood. By the time Guy Fawkes was called, he could barely stand. The guards held him up as he approached the gallows. But then something unexpected happened. In a final act of control, perhaps defiance, Fawkes threw himself from the ladder. Whether he intended to break his neck or simply end it on his own terms is still debated. But when his body hit the platform, his neck snapped, killing him instantly. The crowd gasped. He had cheated the state out of its full punishment. There would be no drawing, no burning of entrails while alive. But the executioners still followed protocol. Fawkes' body was beheaded and quartered posthumously. His severed limbs and head were sent to 4 corners of the kingdom, placed on spikes above gates and bridges as a grim reminder, this is the price of treason. But in a twist of fate, the brutal execution didn't erase Fawkes' legacy, it immortalized it. Just months after his death, Parliament declared November 5th the National Day of Thanksgiving, commemorating the king's survival. Over time, this evolved into Guy Fawkes Night, or Bonfire Night, complete with fireworks and the burning of his effigy. The man once meant to be a villain became a symbol of rebellion, of resistance, and of a government so afraid of ideas that it resorted to the most horrifying punishment known to man. His execution was meant to end a story. Instead, it began a legend. Guy Fawkes died in 1606, but his story didn't. In fact, his death was just the beginning. The Gunpowder Plot had failed. The conspirators were dead, their bodies scattered across the kingdom. Like grim warnings, but something unexpected happened in the ashes. Instead of fading into history, the name Guy Fawkes grew louder with each passing year, not as a traitor but as a symbol. The English government tried to use the failed plot as a way to reinforce loyalty to the crown. Parliament passed the observance of the 5th of November Act, a law requiring an annual public day of thanksgiving for the king's deliverance. Every November 5th, bells rang out, bonfires blazed, ministers gave sermons. But what started as state propaganda slowly morphed into something very different. The people began celebrating not the survival of the king, but the failure of tyranny. Bonfires were lit not just in honor of James I, but to mock authority, to burn effigies of traitors, popes, and politicians. Over time, one face became central to the ritual: Guy Fawkes himself. Children made stuffed guys and tossed them on flames. His name became synonymous with rebellion, with resistance, and with the power of an idea. He became folklore, more myth than man, but the transformation didn't stop there. Centuries later, in a world shaped by revolution and protest, Guy Fawkes returned, this time with a new face. In 1982, a graphic novel titled V for Vendetta introduced a masked vigilante who wore a stylized Guy Fawkes mask to fight against a dystopian government. The story was fictional, but the symbol was real. When the film adaptation released in 2005, the mask became an international icon, Protesters around the world from the Occupy Wall Street movement to anonymous hackers adopted it. In modern times, Fawkes became a global symbol of defiance against corruption, authoritarianism, and oppression. It's ironic. The man who tried to blow up Parliament has now become a face worn by millions demanding justice. Some see it as troubling a celebration of a would-be terrorist. Others see it as powerful, a reminder that when governments abuse power, the people remember. But one thing is certain, they tried to erase him, and they failed. His name outlived the kings, the torturers, the judges. His image has evolved from enemy of the state to anti-hero, folk legend, and rebel spirit. Even the phrase remember, the 5th of November echoes each year, reminding the world of how close power came to falling. In the end, Guy Fawkes never lit the fuse, but his death sparked something else entirely, something that fire and blood couldn't kill. His execution was the state's attempt to control the narrative, but over time, that narrative slipped from their hands and became something they could never have predicted, because you can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea, and the more brutal the death, the more powerful the story. Guy Fawkes died broken, but his legacy still burns bright, defiant, and impossible to forget.